here. What keeps staring me in the face is I just heard this the other night. Maybe you can tell me something about it. You know, on the videos where they keep going to the European explosives expert Danny Jawenko, did he just die? Did he just get killed in an automobile accident?
Well, let's set the context for this question. World Trade Center 7 is quite controversial. There are experts in the controlled demolition industry that deny it. These are those who are tied to the federal government and the richest people in the world who are their clients. But there are some, like in Europe, in fact, the top European controlled demolition expert, Danny Jawenko, cites that, of course, it's a controlled demolition. A team of experts did this. We heard this just in the...
on the video we just saw.
Yeah, and so... he's very clear on record about what this is. In fact, every architect, engineer, and others who see it know, because we've seen before the old hotels come down in Las Vegas at free fall acceleration, dropping like a rock into their own footprints. And so, yes, Danny Jawenko, before he passed away, I think a couple of months ago, he was certainly on record as citing that this is a controlled demolition.
Right.
So in the Twin Towers, it's even more clear when you start to look at the evidence that the eyewitness testimony, for instance, the first responders were recorded in October, 500 of them on oral recordings. And it turns out that 118 of them are talking about sounds of explosions and flashes of light occurring at the onset of the destruction of both of these towers. Now, this is extraordinary testimony because none of the official reports of these buildings have incorporated this eyewitness testimony. Let's listen to a couple of these. This is absolutely extraordinary. It shook my bones. Shortly before the first tower came down, one says, I remember feeling the ground shaking. I heard a terrible noise, and then debris just started flying everywhere. Shortly before the towers came down, I remember feeling the ground shaking, heard a terrible noise, and then debris just started flying everywhere. Somewhere around the middle of the World Trade Center, there was this orange and red flash coming out of the building. What are these flashes they're experiencing? It says it looked like a synchronized, deliberate kind of thing. One floor, another after another. It seemed like on television when they blow up these buildings. It seemed like it was going all the way around like a belt, all these explosions. Now take a look here on this video. You'll see the North Tower going down next to an acknowledged controlled demolition on the left. Is there any similarity? Yes, there's bands of explosions about the area of the jet plane impacts, and the building drops suddenly, symmetrically, and straight down almost into the 80,000 tons of structural steel. Well, that's what controlled demolitions are designed to do. Let's see what the South Tower looks like when it comes down. Well, let's listen to these gentlemen first, who are on record.
It was if they had detonated. Planned to take down a building. Boom, 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 all the way down.
This is pretty amazing. Take a look at the North Tower as it initiates its rapid descent. Now, on the right side, we see an acknowledged explosion. In this case, a volcanic eruption in the Tongan Sea. Underneath that, an acknowledged explosion. Look at the geometry of the towers. Outward arching streamers with thick volumes of heated gases in cauliflower-shaped forms. Almost a geometry of fireworks. Remember, gravity works down, not out. In fact, 4-ton perimeter wall units are being hurled laterally at 70 to 80 miles an hour, laterally, not down.
And they're landing 2 football fields away.
This is up to 600 feet away, 1,400-foot diameter. Look at the North Tower. We're told that this upper section drove the rest of the building down to the ground, and yet watch, it's being destroyed itself in the first 4 seconds. More appropriately seen in this video, where we have the very visible, We'll start and we'll stop. Start and stop. You see the bands of explosions, just like the first responders reported in the oral recordings. Then the upper section of this building is destroyed in the first 4 seconds. There's nothing left to drive the rest of the building down to the ground at any speed, much less near free-fall speed against 80,000 tons of structural steel. This is extraordinary. Now watch what's happening underneath this zone of destruction. This is rather incredible. What we have underneath is a series of, see if I can point this out, there we go, explosions, squibs, or isolated explosive ejections occurring at 200 feet per second, clocked by physicists, many of these. These are not, this is not air being pushed out by a collapsing building above. Now watch in the lower right corner, once again, as we see the advancing explosions underneath this zone of destruction. Not going to play for us right now. Almost as fast as the free-falling debris next to it. Again, in its 1,400-foot diameter. Look at this. The building's only 207 feet wide, but the debris lands well outside the boundaries of ground zero. Compare that to Building 7, whose debris is in a nice, neat pile, a classic implosion, versus the very explosive event known as the World Trade Center 7 demolitions. This is really quite clear. Here are additional squibs. We're told these are puffs of air, but they're obviously pulverized building materials that occur, again, 160 to 200 feet per second, 20, 40, even 60 stories down below the advancing destruction zone. So if these were puffs of air, we would expect all of those windows to blow out, or maybe none of them, but not these highly focalized, pinpoint accurate ejections that are violent and obviously in an engineered pattern at the midpoints of the building. Watch how fast this building is destroyed. And here's 2 seconds, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 seconds, about a dozen seconds, both of these towers are completely destroyed down to the ground. Now, if the upper section was going to be driving the lower section down to the ground, we would expect, according to Newton's third law, that this upper section would receive an equal and opposite reaction. And since it is lighter, the lightest portion of any structure being at the top, it would be destroyed first in these equal and opposite forces.
Yeah, at best, it destroys only an equal amount equal to itself. So how does it crush the other 60% of the building?
Exactly. How does that happen? Let's compare it to an obvious example. Here, a Volkswagen, the lighter structure, an equal and opposite force to the Mack truck. Which one is going to be destroyed first? Let's make it easier. Let's say you drop the Volkswagen onto the Mack truck. Which one gets hurt the most? It's not dissimilar from the destruction of the towers. There's an equal and opposite force still in operation.
That's a great analogy. That's better than the old boxes we used to use.
Right. Well, this is quite analogous. In fact, though, there is, NIST is telling us basically that if we were to hold these two structures up and put no building underneath this one structure on the right, 15-story section, and put underneath an identical 15-story section, a structure with 80,000 tons of structural steel under it, which one would hit the ground first? NIST is basically telling us that they both hit the ground at the same time. In other words, there's almost no resistance underneath this 15-story section on the left. So we know that's ludicrous. Our 7th grade understanding of physics tells us that if there's any resistance, and in this case 80,000 tons of resistance, 5 times stronger than it needs to be to resist this force up above, it's going to at least slow it down. In fact, it could never start at all. We've been fed a series of lies from the official reports. and those lies are extraordinary. The building is completely destroyed all the way down to the ground, nearly symmetrically, and with each of the buildings being destroyed simultaneously. Watch the South Tower. It starts to lean, in fact. And yet we'd expect that top portion to fall off the building, but that's not what happens.
Yeah, it destroys itself in midair.
In midair, it's disintegrated in this cloud. But what's extraordinary, even though we have 22 degrees off of balance here, off center.
Right, it's already rotating.
22 degrees. How can it destroy the building below at any speed? Much less symmetrically, as you see here, all the way down the building, like the fireman described. Bands of explosions wrapping all the way around the building. It's a complete non sequitur. These are explosions. Let me prove it to you. Watch closely in this video where we have the destruction of the building occurring. Not playing. We get a close-up of these where you can see the individual explosions going off one at a time. It is really quite amazing, and the complete building. I mean, buildings that are destroyed due to natural forces, we like earthquakes, we see the building will fall over and it'll certainly be mangled to some extent. But what we don't have is every structural member dismembered from every other one almost. And a complete destruction.
Well, not to mention, I love your example of holding up the metal plate that forms each acre of floor, and 4 inches of concrete, a metal plate. There's over 100 of those acres of concrete, and you can't find any solid pieces of concrete after this thing's over. I mean, if it just fell down, how high do you have to go to drop a piece of concrete where it completely pulverizes when it hits?
Well, not only that, but 220 acres of metal decking, as you described.
Yeah, the metal part doesn't pulverize no matter how high you drop it.
Yeah, so, and yet it did. And what we find in all the World Trade Center dust is not only powdered concrete, but metal filings. I found them myself with a magnet. They come right up to the magnet. I mean, this is extraordinary. Guess how many file cabinets they found of the 10,000 or so steel file cabinets in each building? None.
None.
They didn't find one. They found a little piece of one that you could pick up with your small finger, and it survived because it was in the basement.
Well, the same thing with the bodies of the people. I mean,
well, let's talk about that. We had 2,744 victims lost, and yet what's extraordinary is there are 6,000 pieces of bodies found, 2,000 of them small enough to fit into a test tube.
If they got crushed, they'd just be flat. They wouldn't be particleized.
They'd be flat, and they'd be trapped between levels of floors. But we have still 1,151 victims were completely unaccounted for. In other words, no DNA, no pieces small enough to fit into a test tube. Over a third of these 3,000 bodies we have no trace of. They were vaporized, just like the powdered concrete, the pulverized building contents. This is extraordinary. And we have 700 bone fragments found on top of the skyscraper, across the street from the South Tower, on the Deutsche Bank building. They were about the size of a grain of rice. 700 bone fragments. What can create that? It wasn't the airplane crash. That airplane crash sent its ejections out the other side.
Ask any archaeologist or anthropologist. They search for bones and they find them generally intact over millions of years, and these are destroyed in an instant. It's amazing.
It really is. The degree of pulverization here is unbelievable, and it is direct evidence in and of itself of the explosive destruction of these buildings.
Now, when you were doing your interview this afternoon, one of the best questions I heard was, why does it matter? And your answers, that, we one after another, because it was a lie, based on a lie, one after another. And that was so good. I hope that interview is rebroadcast, but maybe you could tell people why. I've had that question many times. Why are you still worried about 9/11? There's so much going on now. And my answer is, well, that was the big